When I was about 12 or 13 years old, my family had a tradition of celebrating Thanksgiving at my Uncle Rob's house. He lived about 30 minutes away from us. This particular year, the story I'm about to tell happened, though I don't recall exactly when it was. On Thanksgiving morning, my family, that's my parents, my brother, sister, and I, left our house to head over to Uncle Rob's. The roads were pretty quiet as we began our journey, which seemed normal at first. However, about halfway through the drive, my dad noticed something odd. He pointed out that a car had been following us for a while. We all turned to look at the same time and saw a small silver SUV behind us. My dad mentioned that this car had been trailing us since we left our house, which none of us had noticed. At first, I thought it might just be a coincidence. The SUV wasn't driving aggressively or too close to us. We couldn't see the driver because they were keeping their distance. As we continued our drive towards Uncle Rob's, the mystery of this car lingered in our minds. Uncle Rob lived in a quiet neighborhood, with houses spaced out from each other. I was convinced that whoever was in that car wouldn't follow us all the way there. But to our surprise, the car stayed behind us. Even as we made several turns into the neighborhood, we began to speculate that it might be another relative heading to Uncle Rob's. Our family was large and we didn't know every car they drove, yet there was an undeniable sense of suspicion among us. When we finally turned onto Uncle Rob's street, we slowed down, and so did the car. My dad briefly considered continuing to drive to lose the follower, but eventually, he pulled into Uncle Rob's driveway. The car behind us didn't stop. It continued down the street, which was a relief to us. Uncle Rob's house was large, with a spacious yard, making it the perfect place for family gatherings. Once inside, we couldn't see much of the street from the windows, but there was a small view from the living room. We were watching football on TV in the living room, and I was sitting near a window. From time to time, I glanced outside. At one point, I noticed the same SUV driving by slowly, in the opposite direction to which it had gone earlier. It seemed odd, but I didn't think much of it. But then, about 5 minutes later, the car reappeared, creeping along at an extremely slow pace. It stopped just past Uncle Rob's driveway for about half a minute before driving off again. This time I felt something was definitely not right. I told my dad about it, but since the car had left again, there wasn't much we could do. After a while, we all gathered in the dining room for Thanksgiving dinner, and then some of us returned to the living room to continue watching football. By this time, it was dark outside. I was back in my same spot near the window. Suddenly, I thought I saw a figure moving outside. Straining my eyes in the dim light, I was sure I saw a man darting from behind a tree to a bush about 20 feet away. I stood up, startled, and asked my cousin if he saw it too, but he hadn't. I was about to explain to him what I had seen when someone tried to open the back door of the house, startling everyone. The door was locked, luckily. One of my uncles who had been in the living room noticed and asked if someone had gone outside. No one had. Another uncle walked over to the window next to the door and reported seeing a man running away. He opened the door and stepped outside. I looked out the window I was near and saw the man running behind another tree further away. Everyone in the house was now aware of the situation, standing up, looking out the windows and talking about what was happening. Then, I saw the SUV again, driving away quickly down the street. A few of us, despite the cold, went outside to search around the property, but by then the man was gone. For the rest of our time at Uncle Rob's that night, there was no more sign of the man or the car. Eventually, my family decided it was time to head home. Thankfully, our drive back was uneventful with no sign of being followed. But to this day, I still think about that incident. Who was the man following us? Why did he lurk around Uncle Rob's house? These questions remain unanswered, leaving a mystery that sometimes plays back in my mind, especially around Thanksgiving. Back in my senior year of high school, I experienced something quite strange and a bit scary. It was around Thanksgiving, a time usually filled with anticipation for the holiday and a break from school. I lived with my parents and brother in a neighborhood that was fairly populated, and I worked at a local department store to earn some extra money. On the day before Thanksgiving, we had no school, so I decided to work extra hours. I started in the morning and finished around 3 or 4 in the afternoon. After work, my mom asked me to pick up a few items from the grocery store. The store was about 10 minutes away from our home, and it was surrounded by other shops, making it a bustling area, especially during holiday seasons. When I arrived at the grocery store, it was incredibly busy. Finding a parking spot was a challenge in itself. Inside, the store was swarming with people doing their last-minute Thanksgiving shopping. The aisles were crowded, and it took me a while to find everything my mom had listed. The checkout lines were long too. I remember standing in line surrounded by a sea of shoppers, feeling the holiday rush. Finally, after about 30 minutes, which felt much longer due to the crowd, I checked out and headed back to my car. I'd only bought 4 or 5 items, but the whole shopping experience was exhausting. As I left the parking lot and started driving home, the roads were still quite busy with holiday traffic. The drive back was simple, just a few minutes on one main road and then a turn onto a quieter street near our house. As I turned onto our street, I noticed a car following me. It was a dark-colored sedan, quite ordinary looking. Our street was usually quiet, so it wasn't unusual to see other cars, but something about this one felt off. As I pulled into our driveway, to my surprise, the sedan pulled in too. This made me nervous. Why was this car following me home? However, just as I was trying to make sense of it, the car started backing up, turned around, and left. They might have just used our driveway to turn around, but it was still odd. Why mine and not any of the neighbors? Feeling a bit relieved but still puzzled, I went inside with the groceries. My mom was already busy cooking for Thanksgiving. We were supposed to bring a few dishes to our family gathering the next day. I don't recall exactly what she was making, but I think it was a pie. I went to my room to finish some homework and spent the rest of the evening with my family. We all went to bed early, looking forward to sleeping in on Thanksgiving. But for some reason, I woke up much earlier than planned, around 6 in the morning. The sun was just rising. Feeling thirsty, I sat up to grab a drink of water and glanced out the window next to my bed. To my surprise, I saw the same black sedan parked on the side of the road in front of our house. It was the only car parked on our street, which was odd because we rarely had cars parked there, especially so early in the morning. I remember thinking how suspicious it looked. Curious and a bit concerned, I watched the car for a minute. Then, suddenly, a man emerged from what seemed like the side of our house. He wore a winter hat and a dark jacket, and I couldn't make out his features. I had no idea who he was or what he was doing on our property. The man walked across part of our front yard to the back door of the sedan. He opened it and seemed to be rummaging for something, but I couldn't see what. After about a minute, he closed the door and turned around, holding a small duffel bag. It was still a bit dark, and he was at a distance, so I couldn't tell exactly what it was. As he walked a few steps, he seemed to look directly at me. I realized then that he could see me. The dim light in my room and the open blinds made it possible to see inside. I quickly closed the blinds and ducked down, not sure what to expect. Moments later, I heard the car door close. I cautiously peeked out the window again and saw the sedan driving away quickly. Now wide awake and alarmed, I couldn't go back to sleep. When my parents woke up, I told them everything. We checked outside but found no signs of a break-in or any disturbance. That was the last time we saw the man or his car. I still wonder what his intentions were and why he chose our house. Maybe he changed his mind about whatever he planned to do when he realized I had seen him. Whatever his reasons, I'm just grateful nothing worse happened, and he never came back. The smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie filled the air, but my heart was heavy with unease. It was Thanksgiving, a time for gratitude and family, but this year was different. We were at our family cabin deep in the woods, a place usually filled with warmth and laughter. But not this year. This year, something was off. I remember waking up that morning feeling a chill that wasn't just from the November cold. My parents were already busy in the kitchen, and my younger sister Emily was playing outside. I decided to join her, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. As we played, I couldn't help but notice how the woods seemed to close in around us. darker and more foreboding than I remembered. Emily, with her innocent laughter, seemed oblivious to it. That's when I heard it. A whisper, faint and indistinct, coming from the direction of the woods. I froze, straining my ears, but it was gone as quickly as it came. I tried to dismiss it as the wind, but a part of me knew it was something else. The day wore on, the sky grew darker, and the feeling of unease grew stronger. Our parents called us in as dusk approached, their voices tinged with an anxiety they tried to hide. Dinner was a quiet affair. The delicious food did little to lighten the mood. My father, usually the heart of any conversation, barely spoke. My mother kept glancing towards the windows, as if expecting something or someone. Emily seemed the only one unaffected, chatting happily about school and friends. It was after dinner, when we were sitting in the living room, that things took a turn for the worse. A loud thud came from the direction of the back door, startling us all. My father got up to check, a cautious look on his face. He opened the door to find nothing but the cold, dark night. He muttered something about a fallen branch and closed the door. But the peace didn't last. More noises followed, thuds and scratches, each one closer and more aggressive. My father, trying to maintain a brave face, checked each time, finding nothing. Then, as we huddled together, the power went out. The cabin plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the dying embers of the fireplace. My mother lit candles, her hands trembling. The noises outside continued, now accompanied by a low, guttural growling. I could see the fear in my parents' eyes, a fear that mirrored my own. We were trapped, isolated, with something lurking outside. My father whispered about a bear or a wild animal, but we all knew it was something else, something more sinister. The crescendo came with a shattering crash. The living room window exploded inwards, showering us with glass. A shadow, large and imposing, stood in the broken window, its form obscured by the darkness. Its eyes, however, were unmistakable, glowing with a malevolent light. My father shouted for us to run, to hide. In a panic, we scattered. I grabbed Emily's hand, dragging her towards the small storage closet. We huddled together in the dark, listening to the sounds of chaos outside. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind raced with fear. The noises eventually faded, leaving an oppressive silence. We stayed hidden for what felt like hours, afraid to move, to breathe. Eventually, my father's voice called out, hesitant and strained. We emerged to a scene of destruction, the cabin in disarray, the window a gaping hole. But the shadow was gone. There was no sign of what had caused the terror, only the aftermath. My parents were shaken, their faces pale and drawn. We gathered what we could and left the cabin, driving away from the nightmare. To this day, we don't speak of that Thanksgiving. The cabin remains abandoned, a silent testament to the horror we experienced. The shadow in the woods, whatever it was, remains a mystery, a dark memory etched in our minds. This Thanksgiving, as I sit with my family, safe and warm, I can't help but glance out the window, half expecting to see those glowing eyes. The horror of that night lingers, a reminder that some things are beyond understanding, lurking in the shadows, waiting.